Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of history's most impossible victories. And honestly, by the time we're done with these 3 incredible stories, you'll have enough mind-blowing conversation starters to make you the most interesting person at any party. We're talking about moments so legendary that if they happened today, they'd break every social media platform simultaneously. Picture this. You're scrolling through your phone, maybe sipping some tea, getting ready to wind down for the night. The air around you is calm, maybe there's a gentle breeze coming through your window, and everything feels perfectly normal. Now, imagine being a medieval English soldier, exhausted, sick with dysentery, outnumbered 4 to 1, standing in a muddy field in France, knowing that tomorrow you're probably going to die, but then something absolutely extraordinary happens that changes the course of history forever. Now, forget what you think you know about medieval battles being all about who has the biggest army and the shiniest armor, because the truth is way more strategic and psychological than any movie could make it. And honestly, our ancestors were basically playing 4D chess while their enemies were still figuring out checkers. So, before we dive in, hit that like button if you're ready to discover some seriously wild historical facts. That'll make you question everything you thought you knew about what's possible when the odds are stacked against you. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I love seeing our global community of history, lovers, and insomniacs unite over these incredible underdog stories. Now grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's find out why. October 25, 1415 became the day that changed medieval warfare forever. It's St. Crispin's Day, 1415, and the morning mist hangs over the muddy fields near a tiny French village called Agincourt. The smell of wet earth and fear sweat fills the air as approximately 60 English soldiers face down a French army that historians estimate at anywhere from 12 to 30 men. The sound of armor clanking and nervous prayers creates a symphony of impending doom that would make any reasonable person want to run home to their mother. But here's where this story gets absolutely mind-blowing. These English soldiers aren't fresh, well-fed warriors, ready for glorious battle. They're the survivors of a brutal siege at Harfleur that lasted weeks, and dysentery has been ravaging their ranks. Picture trying to fight the most important battle of your life while dealing with medieval food poisoning. It's like showing up to the Olympics with the flu. King Henry V, just 28 years old, looks out at his ragged army and probably thinks, well, this is either going to be the greatest comeback in history or the most expensive way to commit suicide ever invented. The taste of desperation is bitter on his tongue, but there's something else there too, the metallic flavor of pure determination. Because sometimes when you're so completely screwed that surrender isn't even an option, that's when human beings become capable of impossible things. The French army, meanwhile, is basically a medieval all-star team. We're talking about the flower of French nobility. Knights who've trained their entire lives for this moment, wearing the best armor money can buy and riding horses that cost more than most people's houses. The sound of their confidence echoes across the battlefield as they probably place bets on how quickly they can finish off these pathetic English invaders. Here's the kicker that makes this story so universally relatable. We've all been in situations where everyone expects us to fail. Maybe it's a job interview where you're underqualified, or a test you didn't study for, or just life throwing you curveballs faster than you can swing. But Henry V and his men are about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one with nothing left to lose. What makes this moment so perfectly dramatic is the contrast between expectation and reality. The French are so confident of victory that many nobles are arguing about who gets to capture King Henry for ransom rather than focusing on actually winning the battle. 0.3. It's like counting your lottery. Winnings before checking if your numbers match. Confidence can be a beautiful thing right up until it becomes your biggest weakness. The most quotable thing about this setup is that Henry V essentially turns his army's weakness into their greatest strength. When you have nothing to lose, you can take risks that would terrify someone with everything to protect. The feel of mud squelching under their feet becomes familiar as the English soldiers realize that this terrible terrain might actually work in their favor. But here's what makes this story so addictive. It's not just about military tactics or medieval politics. It's about the moment when ordinary people discover they're capable of extraordinary things. The smell of rain-soaked earth mingles with the scent of determination as Henry's army prepares to attempt the impossible. What's really beautiful about this historical moment is how it reveals something profound about human nature. When the French positioned themselves to block Henry's route to Calais, they thought they were trapping him. But sometimes, what looks like a trap becomes an opportunity for someone clever enough to see the angles everyone else is missing. The psychological pressure on both sides must have been incredible. The French know they should win easily, which means anything less than total victory will be humiliating. The English know they're probably going to die, which means they might as well make it count. The sound of heartbeats becomes louder than war drums as both armies prepare for a battle that will echo through centuries. 0.3. Here's the universal wisdom hidden in this medieval drama. Sometimes the most powerful weapon you can have is the element of surprise. And nothing surprises people more than someone who refuses to accept that they're supposed to lose. Henry V is about to prove that intelligence, preparation, and sheer bloody-minded determination can overcome almost any disadvantage. 0.3. What happens next in this muddy field will rewrite the rules of medieval warfare and create a legend that still inspires people 600 years later. Because we're about to witness the moment when terrain becomes destiny, when weather becomes a weapon, and when a bunch of exhausted English archers prove that sometimes David doesn't just beat Goliath, he absolutely demolishes him. The most heartbreaking part of this setup is imagining the letters these soldiers might have written home, knowing they probably wouldn't survive to send them. But the most inspiring part is that they're about to discover something that every underdog needs to know. When the odds are impossible, that's exactly when miracles become possible. The stage is set for one of history's greatest upsets, and it's going to prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to your enemy is let them underestimate you. 0.3. Because what the French don't realize is that they're not just facing an army, they're facing men who've already accepted death and chosen to make it count. So we've just met Henry V and his ragged army of 0 exhausted men facing impossible odds, and now we're about to witness something that will completely rewrite the rules of medieval warfare. Because what happens next isn't just about military tactics, it's about how Mother Nature herself decided to pick sides in one of history's most lopsided battles. And honestly, if there's one thing that proves the universe has a sense of humor, it's watching the most advanced military technology of the 15th century get absolutely destroyed by mud and rain. Picture waking up on the morning of October 25, 1415, and the first thing you notice is the sound of rain still pattering against your tent. It had been raining for days, turning the freshly plowed fields between the villages of Agincourt and Tramecourt into a medieval slip and slide from hell. The smell of wet earth mixed with horse manure creates an aroma that would make a modern sewage treatment plant seem pleasant. But here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly ironic. The French think this weather is just a minor inconvenience, while Henry V is probably looking at that mud and thinking, this might actually save our lives. Now, forget what you think you know about medieval battles being won by whoever has the most knights in shiny armor, because Henry V is about to prove that sometimes the best strategy is to let your enemy's strengths become their greatest weaknesses. The battlefield at Agincourt was only about 0 yards wide, flanked by dense woods on both sides, creating a natural funnel that would force the massive French army to compress into a much smaller space. But here's where this story gets absolutely mind-blowing. Henry V doesn't just accept the terrain, he weaponizes it. His army positions itself at the narrow end of this funnel, with about 5 longbowmen protected by roughly 0 men-at-arms. The feel of wooden stakes being driven into the muddy ground becomes a rhythm of preparation as English archers create their defensive line. It's like watching someone turn a disadvantage into the ultimate home field advantage. What makes this tactical setup so genius is how it exploits every weakness in the French battle plan. The French heavy cavalry, which should have been their trump card, becomes almost useless in the narrow, muddy field. Picture trying to charge a horse through knee-deep mud while wearing 60 pounds of armor. It's like trying to run a marathon in a diving suit. The sound of horses struggling and slipping in the muck becomes the soundtrack to French frustration. Here's the quotable moment that defines this entire battle. The French didn't lose because they were bad soldiers. They lost because they were fighting the wrong war in the wrong place at the wrong time. While they're still thinking about medieval cavalry charges and knightly honor, Henry V is playing a completely different game based on terrain, weather, and psychological warfare. But the real genius of Henry's strategy becomes clear when you understand the English longbow. These weren't just any archers, they were professional soldiers who could accurately shoot arrows up to 250 yards and loose 12 arrows per minute. The taste of bowstring wax becomes familiar as these men prepare to unleash what amounts to medieval machine gun fire. It's like bringing assault rifles to a sword fight, except the assault rifles are made of wood and human skill. What's really beautiful about this tactical masterpiece is how it turns the French army's size against itself. As the massive French force tries to advance through the narrow, muddy field, they become increasingly compressed and disorganized. The smell of fear sweat mingles with the scent of wet leather and metal as thousands of French soldiers realize they're trapped in a killing field. It's like watching a traffic jam turn into a disaster movie. The psychological impact of this setup cannot be overstated. The French knights, who've trained their entire lives to fight in open fields with room to maneuver, suddenly find themselves squeezed together like sardines in a can. The sound of armor clanking against armor becomes a symphony of claustrophobia as the flower of French nobility discovers that all their training is useless in this muddy nightmare. Here's where this story becomes universally relatable. We've all been in situations where our greatest strengths suddenly become liabilities. Maybe it's being overqualified for a job, or having too many options when you need to make a quick decision. The French army at Agincourt is basically every perfectionist who's ever been paralyzed by their own high standards. But the most shocking part of Henry's tactical genius is how he uses the terrain to create a psychological weapon. When the French cavalry finally charges, they're not just fighting English soldiers, they're fighting gravity, mud, exhaustion, and their own expectations. The feel of heavy armor chrome extension. DBNG Pielond LKMNG, Bemblog IPAC Icons 96. PNG, dragging them down in the muck, becomes a metaphor for how overconfidence can literally sink you. What makes this moment so addictive is watching the exact moment when the French realize they've been outplayed, as their horses struggle and slip in the mud, as their formation breaks apart, as English arrows start raining down like a medieval hailstorm. The French army experiences what can only be described as collective oh shit moment. It's like watching someone realize they've been playing checkers while their opponent was playing chess. The most quotable wisdom from this tactical masterpiece is that sometimes the best way to win is to let your enemy defeat themselves. Henry V didn't need to outfight the French, he just needed to create conditions where their own strengths would destroy them. The sound of French war cries turning into cries of frustration becomes the audio signature of a plan falling apart. Here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly relevant to our modern world. Henry V essentially used environmental factors as a force multiplier. While the French were focused on traditional metrics like troop numbers and equipment quality, Henry was thinking about weather, terrain, and logistics. It's like watching someone win a video game by understanding the map better than their opponents, understand their characters. The most heartbreaking part of this tactical brilliance is imagining the French soldiers who realized what was happening but couldn't do anything to stop it. Trapped in their heavy armor, stuck in the mud, with English arrows falling like rain, they must have felt like they were drowning in their own success. The taste of defeat becomes bitter when you realize you've been defeated by your own assumptions, but what happens next will make this tactical setup look like gentle preparation for the main event. Because we're about to witness the moment when English arrows meet French arrogance, and the result is going to be so one-sided that it will echo through military history for centuries. The real question isn't whether the English will win, it's whether the French will survive their own overconfidence. And trust me, what we discover about the actual fighting will make every action movie you've ever seen look like a children's playground dispute. Because when 5-0 professional archers start shooting at a compressed mass of heavily armored targets stuck in the mud, the result isn't a battle. It's a massacre with a medieval soundtrack. So, we've just watched Henry V turn a muddy field into the ultimate tactical advantage. And now we're about to witness something that will make every sports upset you've ever seen look like a gentle disagreement. Because what happens next isn't just a battle. It's a masterclass in how overconfidence can literally get you killed. And honestly, the French nobility is about to learn the most expensive lesson in medieval history. We're talking about the moment when 600 years of military tradition gets absolutely demolished by a bunch of exhausted English farmers with really good aim. Picture this. You're a French knight, born into nobility, trained from childhood to fight in heavy armor, probably worth more in equipment than most people's annual salary. The smell of expensive leather and polished metal fills your nostrils as you prepare for what should be the easiest victory of your career. The sound of your fellow nobles joking and placing bets on how quickly they'll finish off these pathetic English invaders echoes through the morning air. But here's the kicker that makes this story so darkly hilarious. You're about to become a cautionary tale about what happens when you mistake arrogance for confidence. The French battle plan, if you can even call it that, was basically charge forward and let our superior numbers and equipment do the work. It's like showing up to a chess match and deciding your strategy is to flip the board over and hope for the best. What they didn't account for was that Henry V had spent the morning turning their greatest strengths into their biggest weaknesses. Here's where the story gets absolutely wild. As the French cavalry begins their charge across that muddy field, They're not just fighting the English, they're fighting physics itself. The feel of heavy armor that once made them feel invincible now becomes a death trap. As horses slip and slide in the muck, it's like watching someone try to run a marathon in a diving suit while the ground keeps shifting under their feet. But the real shock comes when those English longbows start singing. The sound of 0 arrows being loosed simultaneously creates a noise that witnesses described as like thunder, except thunder that keeps coming and coming and coming. Picture standing in a medieval hailstorm where every hailstone is designed to punch through armor and kill you. The taste of fear becomes metallic in French mouths as they realize they're not in a battle, they're in a shooting gallery. What makes this moment so universally relatable is that we've all been in situations where our confidence got ahead of our preparation. Maybe it's walking into a test you thought would be easy, or starting a project you assumed would be simple. The French army at Agincourt is basically every person who's ever said, "How hard could it be?" right before discovering exactly how hard it could be. The psychological impact of those first arrow volleys cannot be overstated. French knights who had never experienced fear in battle suddenly find themselves watching their friends and horses fall around them like wheat before a scythe. The smell of blood and mud mingles with the scent of terror as the flower of French nobility realizes they've walked into a trap of their own, making... Here's the quotable moment that defines this entire disaster. The French didn't lose because they were bad soldiers. They lost because they were playing by rules that no longer applied. While they're still thinking about honorable single combat and knightly valor, Henry's archers are demonstrating that sometimes the most honorable thing you can do is win efficiently. But what happens next is where this story goes from shocking to absolutely heartbreaking. As the French cavalry charge breaks apart in the mud, the survivors try to advance on foot, but they're wearing 60 pounds of armor in knee-deep muck. It's like watching someone try to swim while wearing a refrigerator. The sound of heavy breathing and desperate struggling becomes the soundtrack to French desperation. The most tragic part of this whole disaster is how it reveals the gap between medieval theory and medieval reality. These French knights had trained their entire lives for battles that looked nothing like what they're experiencing at Agincourt. The feel of mud sucking at their feet becomes a metaphor for how quickly the world can change underneath you. What's really beautiful about Henry's tactical genius is how he uses the French army's size against itself. As more and more French soldiers pile into that narrow, muddy, killing field, they become increasingly compressed and unable to maneuver. It's like watching a traffic jam turn into a disaster movie, except the cars are wearing armor and the traffic cones are shooting arrows. The most quotable wisdom from this medieval massacre is that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is your own assumptions. The French assumed their superior numbers and equipment would guarantee victory, but they never considered that their enemy might change the rules of engagement entirely. The taste of defeat becomes bitter when you realize you've been defeated by your own expectations. Here's where this story becomes a perfect metaphor for modern life. The French army represents every organization that's ever been disrupted by someone who refused to play by the established rules. While they're perfecting yesterday's tactics, Henry V is inventing tomorrow's warfare. It's like watching a taxi company get destroyed by ride-sharing apps. Same basic service, completely different approach. The psychological breakdown of the French army happens in stages that are almost painful to watch. First confusion as their charge fails, then panic as the arrows keep coming, then desperation as they realize they're trapped in their own formation. The sound of French war cries turning into cries for mercy becomes the audio signature of an empire's confidence crumbling in real time. What makes this moment so eternally fascinating is how it proves that innovation beats tradition when tradition stops adapting. The French were fighting the last war while Henry V was fighting the next one. The smell of gunpowder might still be centuries away, but the principle of using technology and tactics to overcome numerical disadvantage is being written in blood and mud. The most heartbreaking part of this entire disaster is imagining the moment when individual French knights realize what's happening, trapped in their heavy armor, stuck in the mud, with English arrows falling like rain. They must have felt like they were drowning in their own success. The feel of helplessness becomes overwhelming when you realize that everything you thought was your strength has become your weakness. But here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly relevant to our modern world. This isn't just about medieval warfare, it's about what happens when any established system meets genuine innovation. Every industry disruption, every technological revolution, every moment when the underdog beats the favorite follows the same basic pattern we're seeing at Agincourt. What happens next will make this tactical brilliance look like gentle preparation for the ultimate lesson about human nature. Because we're about to discover how a single day in a muddy French field changed not just military history, but the entire balance of power in medieval Europe, The real question isn't just how Henry V won this impossible battle, it's what this victory reveals about the power of preparation, innovation, and refusing to accept that you're supposed to lose. And trust me, what we learn about the aftermath of Agincourt will make every underdog story you've ever heard look like amateur hour. Because sometimes the most important victory isn't the one you win on the battlefield, it's the one you win in the history book. So we've just witnessed the French nobility get absolutely demolished by English arrows in a muddy field, and now we're about to discover something that will make this impossible victory feel like just the beginning of a much larger story. Because what happened at Agincourt wasn't just a battle, it was the moment when the entire medieval world realized that the rules of warfare had changed forever. And honestly, if there's one thing that proves how a single day can reshape history, it's watching Henry V turn a desperate gamble into a legend that still inspires underdogs 600 years later. Picture the aftermath of this medieval massacre. The field at Agincourt is littered with over 6-0 French dead, including some of the most powerful nobles in Europe, while English casualties number fewer than 450. The smell of victory mixed with the metallic scent of blood creates an atmosphere that witnesses will never forget. The sound of English soldiers moving through the battlefield, barely able to believe what they've accomplished, echoes with a mixture of triumph and shock. It's like watching someone win the lottery while simultaneously discovering they've accidentally invented time travel. But here's where this story gets absolutely mind-blowing. The psychological impact of Agincourt extends far beyond the immediate military victory. Henry V has just proven that a small, well-organized force using innovative tactics can defeat a much larger traditional army. The taste of this revelation is both sweet and terrifying, because it means that every military assumption in medieval Europe has just been proven wrong. What makes this moment so universally relevant is how it demonstrates the power of preparation meeting opportunity. Henry V didn't just get lucky, he created conditions where luck could work in his favor. The feel of mud under English feet becomes a metaphor for how sometimes your worst circumstances can become your greatest advantages if you're smart enough to see the angles. The most quotable wisdom from Agincourt is that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to your enemy is let them underestimate you while you're busy changing the rules of the game. While the French were playing medieval warfare by the traditional playbook, Henry V was writing a completely new chapter. It's like watching someone win a chess match by introducing pieces their opponent didn't know existed. Here's the kicker that makes this victory so eternally fascinating. Agincourt didn't just change military tactics, it changed how people thought about what was possible. The English longbow, which had been around for decades, suddenly became the weapon that every army in Europe wanted to understand and counter. The sound of bowstrings being tested echoes across medieval training grounds as military leaders realize they need to completely rethink their approach to warfare. But what's really beautiful about this historical moment is how it reveals something profound about human potential. Those 6-0 exhausted English soldiers didn't just win a battle, they proved that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to accept that they're supposed to lose. The smell of their determination becomes as real as the scent of victory, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply refusing to give up. The political ramifications of Agincourt ripple across Europe like a medieval earthquake. Henry V's victory forces France to sign the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, making him heir to the French throne and fundamentally altering the balance of power in medieval Europe. It's like watching a single poker hand change the ownership of entire kingdoms. What makes this story so addictive is how it proves that innovation beats tradition when tradition stops adapting. The French army at Agincourt represents every organization that's ever been disrupted by someone who refused to play by the established rule. The taste of disruption becomes familiar as we realize we're witnessing the medieval equivalent of a startup destroying an established industry. Here's where this victory becomes a perfect metaphor for modern life. Agincourt shows us that sometimes the most important battles are won not by having the most resources, but by using your resources more intelligently than your competition. Henry V's army was smaller, sicker, and more exhausted than the French, but they were also more focused, better organized, and more willing to embrace new tactics. The psychological transformation of the English soldiers after Agincourt cannot be overstated. Men who woke up that morning expecting to die went to sleep that night as the heroes of one of history's greatest upsets. The feel of impossible victory becomes intoxicating, proving that sometimes the most powerful drug is discovering you're capable of more than you ever imagined. But here's the most inspiring part of this entire story. Agincourt proves that the biggest obstacles often create the biggest opportunities. The mud that should have been the English army's death trap became their salvation. The exhaustion that should have made them weak made them desperate enough to be brilliant. The numerical disadvantage that should have guaranteed their defeat forced them to be more creative than their enemies. What's really heartbreaking about this victory is realizing how many of those English soldiers probably never fully understood the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. They were just trying to survive another day, but they ended up changing the course of history. The sound of their footsteps leaving that muddy field echoes through centuries as a reminder that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. The most beautiful lesson from Agincourt is that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to accept that you're supposed to lose. Henry V and his men didn't have better equipment or more training than their enemies, they just had better ideas and the courage to execute them. The smell of possibility becomes as real as the scent of victory. But here's what makes this story so perfectly relevant to our modern world. Every time someone tells you that something is impossible, remember that 6-0 exhausted English soldiers once proved that impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet. The taste of that truth is both challenging and liberating, because it means that our own limitations might be more negotiable than we think. As we prepare to leave the muddy fields of Agincourt behind, remember that this story isn't really about medieval warfare. It's about the eternal human capacity to overcome impossible odds through intelligence, preparation, and sheer bloody-minded determination. The feel of that mud under English feet becomes a metaphor for how sometimes our worst circumstances can become our greatest opportunities. What happens next in our journey through history's greatest upsets will make Agincourt look like a warm-up act for something even more impossible. Because we're about to meet a general who didn't just change the rules of warfare, he literally rewrote geography itself. Hannibal Barca is waiting in the Alps with his war elephants, and he's about to show us what happens when someone decides that impossible is just another word for creative opportunity. The real wisdom of Agincourt isn't about military tactics or medieval politics. It's about what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept extraordinary limitations. Henry V and his men prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon you can have is the simple refusal to believe that you're supposed to lose. And that's a lesson that transcends any particular century or battlefield. It's about what it means to be courageously, impossibly human. So, we've just watched Henry V turn impossible odds into legendary victory through mud and arrows, and now we're about to meet someone who makes that medieval upset look like a warm-up act for the main event. Because what happens next isn't just about military genius, it's about a man who literally looked at the map of the known world and said, you know what? I'm going to hack geography itself. And honestly, if there's one person in history who proves that the most dangerous weapon you can have is refusing to accept that something is impossible, it's Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who turned the Alps into his personal highway to Rome. Picture this. You're sitting in a war council in 218 BC, looking at maps of the Mediterranean, and everyone's discussing the traditional routes for attacking Rome. The smell of olive oil and parchment fills the air as military advisors point to well-established sea routes and conventional land approaches. The sound of reasonable strategic discussion echoes through the room as grown men debate logistics, supply lines, and proven tactics. But then Hannibal Barca walks in and basically says, what if we just took elephants over the highest mountains in Europe instead? Now, forget what you think you know about ancient warfare being all about who has the biggest army and the most traditional approach. Because Hannibal is about to prove that sometimes the most brilliant strategy is the one that makes everyone else say, that's completely insane, right before it works perfectly. We're talking about a 29-year-old general who looked at the Alps, mountains that had never been crossed by an army, let alone an army with war elephants, and thought, this is exactly how I'm going to surprise the most powerful empire in the world. Here's the first thing that makes Hannibal's story so universally relatable. We've all been in situations where the conventional approach wasn't working. Maybe it's a project at work where the standard methods keep failing, or a personal challenge where traditional solutions don't fit. Hannibal represents every person who's ever looked at an impossible problem and thought, what if we just completely change the rules of the game? But what makes this story so addictive is understanding the sheer audacity of what Hannibal is proposing. Rome expects attacks to come from the sea or through the relatively easy passes in the south. They've built their entire defensive strategy around controlling these conventional routes. The taste of strategic complacency must have been sweet on Roman tongues, as they assumed their enemies would play by the established rules. What's absolutely mind-blowing about Hannibal's approach is how it reveals his understanding of psychology as much as geography, he's not just planning a military campaign, he's planning a psychological shock that will shake Rome's confidence to its core. The sound of his war elephants trumpeting in the Italian countryside is going to be the audio signature of Roman assumptions crumbling in real time. The most quotable thing about Hannibal's strategic genius is that sometimes the best way to win is to fight a completely different war than the one your enemy is prepared for. While Rome is perfecting their defenses against conventional attacks, Hannibal is basically inventing a new category of warfare. It's like showing up to a chess match and announcing that you're going to play three-dimensional chess instead. Here's where this story becomes perfectly relevant to our modern world. Hannibal essentially represents every disruptive innovator who's ever succeeded by refusing to accept industry limitations. He's the ancient equivalent of someone who looks at an established market and says, what if we just completely reimagine how this works? The feel of revolutionary thinking becomes as tangible as the mountain air he's about to breathe. But what makes Hannibal's plan so fascinating is how it combines impossible ambition with meticulous preparation. This isn't just a crazy idea, it's a crazy idea backed by serious intelligence gathering, careful planning, and an understanding of both his own capabilities and his enemy's weaknesses. The smell of preparation mingles with the scent of audacity as Hannibal transforms a wild dream into a viable military strategy. The psychological profile of someone who attempts this kind of strategic revolution is absolutely captivating. Hannibal has to be confident enough to bet everything on an unprecedented approach, while also being realistic enough to actually execute it. It's like being simultaneously the most optimistic and most practical person in the room. What's really beautiful about this moment in history is how it demonstrates the power of thinking beyond conventional limitations. While everyone else is looking at the Alps and seeing an impossible barrier, Hannibal is looking at them and seeing the ultimate surprise route. The taste of possibility becomes intoxicating when you realize that most impossible things are just things nobody's figured out how to do yet. Here's the kicker that makes this story so eternally inspiring. Hannibal proves that sometimes the most dangerous person in any conflict is the one who refuses to accept that the rules can't be changed. Every industry disruption, every technological breakthrough, every moment when someone achieves the impossible follows the same basic pattern we're seeing with Hannibal's Alpine strategy. The most heartbreaking part of Hannibal's genius is realizing how many brilliant ideas probably never get attempted because they seem too crazy. How many potential Hannibals have looked at their own Alps and decided it was too risky, too unprecedented, too likely to fail? The sound of unexplored possibilities echoes through history like a symphony of missed opportunities. But what makes this story so addictive is that Hannibal doesn't just dream big, he backs up his vision with incredible tactical intelligence. He understands that crossing the Alps isn't just about getting to Italy. It's about arriving in Italy with an army that's psychologically prepared for anything. The feel of shared hardship becomes a weapon as powerful as any sword or spear. The most quotable wisdom from Hannibal's strategic approach is that innovation isn't just about having crazy ideas, it's about having crazy ideas that actually work. Anyone can propose doing something impossible, but it takes genuine genius to figure out how to make the impossible practical. The smell of strategic brilliance becomes as real as the mountain air he's about to conquer. What happens next in Hannibal's story will make this strategic planning look like gentle preparation for one of the most insane logistical challenges in human history. Because we're about to witness the moment when theoretical genius meets practical nightmare and discover whether war elephants can actually survive a journey that would challenge modern mountaineers. The real question isn't whether Hannibal's plan is brilliant, it's whether brilliance is enough when you're literally trying to rewrite the laws of physics and geography. And trust me, what we discover about the actual Alpine crossing will make every extreme sports documentary you've ever seen look like a gentle nature walk, because when you're leading 90 zero men and 37 war elephants through terrain that doesn't technically exist on any military map, every step becomes a choice between legend and disaster. So we've just watched Hannibal look at the Alps and decide they're basically his personal highway to Rome, and now we're about to witness something that will make every extreme sports documentary you've ever seen look like a gentle nature walk. Because what happens next isn't just about military logistics, it's about the moment when theoretical genius meets practical nightmare. And honestly, if there's one thing that proves humans are capable of absolutely insane achievements when they refuse to accept limitations, it's watching 90 zero men and 37 war elephants attempt to cross terrain that doesn't technically exist on any military map. Picture this. You're standing at the base of the Alps in 218 BC, looking up at peaks that disappear into clouds, and the smell of snow and pine fills the air even though it's still technically summer. The sound of 37 war elephants trumpeting echoes off the mountain walls as Hannibal's massive army prepares for what amounts to the most expensive and dangerous hiking trip in human history. The feel of cold mountain air against your skin becomes a preview of the nightmare that's about to unfold, because crossing the Alps isn't just difficult, it's the kind of challenge that makes modern mountaineers break out in cold sweats. Now, forget what you think you know about ancient armies being simple affairs with a few guys carrying spears, because Hannibal's force includes 90, 0 infantry, 12, 0 cavalry, and those 37 war elephants, plus all the baggage trains, supplies, and camp followers that make an ancient army function. It's like trying to move a small city through terrain that would challenge a modern expedition with GPS and helicopter support. But here's where this story gets absolutely wild. The route Hannibal chooses is probably the Col de la Traversette, which at over 9,000 feet is literally the highest and most dangerous pass in the Western Alps. While any reasonable general would look for the easiest route, Hannibal picks the most insane one because it's also the most unexpected. It's like choosing to climb Mount Everest instead of taking the highway, because nobody expects you to be that crazy. The most quotable thing about this entire expedition is that Hannibal didn't just cross the Alps, he turned geography itself into a weapon. While Rome is busy fortifying conventional routes, Hannibal is literally rewriting the rules of what's possible in ancient warfare. The taste of thin mountain air becomes a metaphor for how sometimes the most brilliant strategies require you to operate in conditions where normal people can't even breathe. Here's where this story becomes universally relatable. We've all been in situations where the safe route wasn't available and we had to attempt something that seemed impossible. Maybe it's starting a business with no money or moving to a new country without speaking the language. Hannibal represents every person who's ever looked at an impossible challenge and thought, well, if I'm going to fail, I might as well fail spectacularly. But what makes this crossing so fascinating is how it reveals the brutal reality behind Hannibal's genius. The first major obstacle comes from the Allobroges tribe, who attack Hannibal's column in an ambush near modern Grenoble, causing heavy losses in both men and animals. The sound of battle echoes through mountain valleys as Hannibal learns that his enemies aren't just Romans, they're anyone who sees his massive army as a threat or an opportunity. What's really heartbreaking about this journey is watching the toll it takes on both men and animals. As the army climbs higher into the mountains, the air gets thinner, the cold gets more brutal, and the paths get more treacherous. The smell of exhaustion and fear mingles with the scent of snow as soldiers who signed up for a military campaign realize they're actually participants in a survival horror movie. The psychological impact of this crossing cannot be overstated. Hannibal's men are not just fighting Romans, they're fighting the mountain itself. And the mountain is winning. Every step forward becomes a victory against terrain that seems designed to kill them, and every mile gained feels like stealing something from the gods themselves. Here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly relevant to our modern world. Hannibal essentially proves that sometimes the most important battles are fought against our own limitations rather than our enemies. While Rome is preparing for conventional warfare, Hannibal is busy proving that impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet. But the real nightmare begins when they encounter the hostile Gauls at what Polybius calls the White Rock Place. These unnamed tribes attack the baggage animals and roll heavy stones down from the heights, causing both men and animals to panic and lose their footing on precipitous paths. The feel of loose rock underfoot becomes a constant reminder that one wrong step means death, and the sound of falling stones becomes the soundtrack to terror. What's absolutely mind-blowing about Hannibal's response to this crisis is how he turns desperation into tactical brilliance. Mistrusting his Gallic guides and harassed by daytime assaults, Hannibal bivouacs on a large bare rock to cover the passage by night of his horses and pack animals. It's like watching someone turn a death trap into a strategic advantage through pure force of will and tactical genius. The most beautiful part of this entire ordeal is how it reveals something profound about leadership under impossible conditions. While his men are literally dying around him, Hannibal maintains the vision and determination necessary to keep the entire expedition moving forward. The taste of leadership becomes bitter when you realize that every decision you make determines whether thousands of people live or die. Here's what makes this crossing so eternally inspiring. Hannibal proves that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to turn back. Every step up those mountains becomes a choice between the impossible dream ahead and the certain failure behind. And somehow, against all odds and logic, Hannibal chooses to keep climbing. But the real tragedy of this Alpine crossing is the cost in lives and equipment. By the time Hannibal's army emerges on the Italian side of the Alps, he's lost nearly half his men and most of his elephants. The smell of victory is mixed with a scent of death as Hannibal realizes that his brilliant strategy has succeeded, but at a price that would break most commanders. What's really quotable about this entire expedition is that Hannibal didn't just cross the Alps. He proved that human determination can literally move mountains. Every impossible step, every death-defying climb, every moment when turning back would have been the rational choice becomes evidence that sometimes the most important victories are won against our own limitations. The most heartbreaking part of this story is imagining the individual soldiers who didn't make it, men who followed Hannibal's vision into the mountains and died, not in glorious battle, but from cold, exhaustion, and the simple brutality of terrain that doesn't care about human ambition. The sound of their final breaths becomes lost in the mountain wind, but their sacrifice makes possible one of history's greatest strategic surprises. But here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly ironic. The crossing that nearly destroys Hannibal's army also creates the psychological weapon that will terrorize Rome for years. The men who survive this ordeal aren't just soldiers anymore. They're legends who've proven they can accomplish the impossible. The feel of Italian soil under their feet becomes sweeter because they've earned it through suffering that would have killed lesser men. What happens next will make this Alpine nightmare look like gentle preparation for the main event. Because we're about to witness the moment when Hannibal's battered but psychologically invincible army arrives in Italy and discovers that Rome has no idea what's about to hit them. The real question isn't whether Hannibal's strategy will work, it's whether Rome can survive the shock of realizing that someone just rewrote all the rules of warfare. And trust me, what we discover about Hannibal's tactical genius at Cannae will make this Alpine crossing look like a warm-up exercise for the ultimate masterclass in how to destroy a much larger army through pure strategic brilliance, because sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who's already proven they can do the impossible. So we've just watched Hannibal somehow survive the Alps crossing with a battered but psychologically invincible army, and now we're about to witness something that will make every military upset you've ever heard about look like a gentle disagreement. Because what happens next isn't just a battle, it's the moment when the most powerful empire in the world discovers that all their military assumptions are not just wrong, they're catastrophically, hilariously, devastatingly wrong. And honestly, if there's one thing that proves genius can literally rewrite the laws of warfare, it's watching Hannibal turn the Battle of Cannae into the ultimate masterclass in how to destroy a much larger army through pure tactical brilliance. Picture this. It's August 20th. 216 BC, and you're a Roman soldier standing in the largest army Rome has ever assembled? The smell of confidence fills the air as 86. 0 Roman and allied troops prepare to finally crush this upstart Carthaginian who's been embarrassing the empire for 2 years. The sound of 68, 0 infantry and 0 cavalry moving into formation creates a rhythm of inevitable victory, because honestly, how could anyone possibly defeat this many Romans? But here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly ironic. Hannibal is looking at this massive army and thinking, perfect, the bigger they are, the more spectacular their fall will be. Now, forget what you think you know about ancient battles being chaotic melees where the biggest army usually wins. Because Hannibal is about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to your enemy is let them bring exactly the kind of army they think will guarantee victory. While the Romans are thinking in terms of overwhelming force, Hannibal is thinking in terms of physics, psychology, and the art of turning your enemy's strengths into their greatest weaknesses. The Roman battle plan is so straightforward it's almost adorable. March their massive infantry force straight into Hannibal's center and crush everything through sheer weight of numbers. It's like bringing a sledgehammer to solve every problem, except the problem you're trying to solve is actually a puzzle that requires finesse. The taste of traditional Roman confidence must have been sweet on the tongues of consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro as they prepared to end Hannibal's Italian adventure once and for all. But here's where Hannibal's genius becomes absolutely mind-blowing. He deploys his 50 zero-man army in a formation that looks like a bow, with his weakest troops in the center and his strongest African veterans hidden on the flanks. It's like setting up a trap that's so obvious it becomes invisible. Because who would expect someone to deliberately put their worst soldiers where the enemy is going to hit hardest? The most quotable thing about Hannibal's tactical setup is that sometimes the best way to win is to let your enemy think they're winning right up until the moment they realize they've destroyed themselves? While the Romans are focused on breaking through his center, Hannibal is orchestrating a symphony of destruction that will make their numerical advantage completely irrelevant. What makes this moment so universally relatable is that we've all been in situations where someone tried to overpower us instead of outthinking us. Maybe it's a workplace bully who thinks volume equals authority, or a competitor who assumes bigger budgets guarantee better results. Hannibal represents every underdog who's ever realized that intelligence can beat force if you're clever enough to use your enemy's aggression against them. Here's where this story gets absolutely wild. As the Roman infantry charges into Hannibal's center, his Spanish and Gallic troops begin a controlled retreat that draws the Romans deeper and deeper into what amounts to a killing funnel. The feel of victory becomes intoxicating for Roman soldiers as they push forward, thinking they're breaking Hannibal's line, not realizing they're walking into the most sophisticated trap in military history. But the real genius of Hannibal's plan becomes clear when you understand the psychology behind it. The Romans are so focused on their frontal assault that they don't notice Hannibal's cavalry systematically destroying their own cavalry on both flanks. It's like being so focused on winning an argument that you don't notice someone quietly removing all your escape routes. What's really beautiful about this tactical masterpiece is how it demonstrates the power of patience and precision over brute force. As the Roman center pushes deeper into Hannibal's deliberately weakening line, they become more and more compressed, unable to use their superior numbers effectively. The sound of Roman war cries gradually changes from confident to confused as soldiers realize something is going very, very wrong. The moment when Hannibal springs his trap is like watching a master magician reveal the trick that's been happening in plain sight all along. His African veterans, who've been waiting patiently on the flanks, suddenly wheel inward and attack the Roman flanks while his cavalry charges into their rear. The smell of Roman confidence instantly transforms into the metallic scent of terror as 86. 0 men realize they've been completely outmaneuvered. Here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly relevant to our modern world. Hannibal essentially invents the concept of the double envelopment, a tactical maneuver that military academies still study 200 years later. While the Romans are playing checkers with overwhelming force, Hannibal is playing three-dimensional chess with physics and psychology. The psychological impact of this encirclement cannot be overstated. Roman soldiers, who moments before were confident of victory, suddenly find themselves trapped in an ever-shrinking circle of death, pressed so tightly together they can barely lift their weapons. The taste of panic becomes overwhelming as men who've never experienced defeat realize they're about to become part of the worst military disaster in Roman history. What makes this moment so universally terrifying is how it demonstrates that sometimes your greatest strength can become your greatest weakness in the hands of a clever enemy. The Roman army's massive size, which should have guaranteed victory, becomes the very thing that makes their destruction so complete. It's like watching someone use your own momentum to throw you in judo. The harder you push, the more devastating your fall. The most heartbreaking part of this tactical brilliance is the human cost. When the slaughter finally ends, over 700 Roman soldiers lie dead on the field, with another 19, 300 captured, and only 550 managing to escape. The smell of blood and death creates an atmosphere so overwhelming that witnesses describe finding soldiers who suffocated themselves trying to burrow into the earth to escape the horror. But here's what makes this victory so perfectly tragic. Hannibal loses only about 6 men, while virtually annihilating the largest army Rome has ever assembled. It's like watching someone win a boxing match by knockout while barely breaking a sweat. The disparity between effort and result is almost incomprehensible. The most quotable wisdom from Cani is that sometimes the most dangerous person in any conflict is the one who understands that rules are just suggestions waiting to be rewritten. While Rome is perfecting traditional warfare, Hannibal is inventing entirely new categories of tactical thinking. The feel of revolutionary genius becomes as tangible as the mountain air he once breathed. What's really mind-blowing about this battle is how it reveals the gap between tactical brilliance and strategic success. Despite achieving what military historians consider the perfect battle, Hannibal still can't force Rome to surrender. It's like winning every argument but still losing the relationship. Sometimes being right isn't enough if you can't convert tactical victories into strategic objectives. The psychological impact of Cannae on Rome cannot be overstated. When news of the disaster reaches the city, panic grips the population, and women flock to temples to weep for their lost husbands, sons, and brothers. The sound of collective grief echoes through Roman streets as an empire realizes that their military invincibility was just an illusion waiting to be shattered. But here's the kicker that makes this story so eternally relevant. Cannae proves that innovation beats tradition when tradition stops adapting. Every industry disruption, every technological revolution, every moment when the underdog beats the favorite follows the same basic pattern we're seeing on this ancient battlefield. What happens next will make this tactical masterpiece look like preparation for an even more profound lesson about the relationship between genius and tragedy. Because we're about to discover that sometimes the most brilliant victories can also be the most pyrrhic, and that winning the perfect battle doesn't always mean winning the war. Hannibal's greatest triumph is about to become the beginning of his ultimate downfall, and the lesson it teaches about the price of genius will echo through military history forever. And trust me, what we learn about the aftermath of Cannae will make every strategic decision you've ever questioned look like child's play, because sometimes the most important choice isn't how to win the battle, it's what to do after you've won it so perfectly that everyone expects you to be invincible. So we've just witnessed Hannibal achieve the perfect battle at Cannae, virtually annihilating the largest army Rome has ever assembled, and now we're about to discover something that will make this tactical masterpiece feel like the beginning of the most tragic lesson in military history. Because what happens next isn't just about the aftermath of victory. It's about how sometimes achieving the impossible can become your greatest curse. And honestly, if there's one thing that proves genius without resources is just expensive brilliance, it's watching Hannibal discover that winning the perfect battle doesn't automatically win you the war. Picture this. You're Hannibal Barca, standing on the field at Cannae, surrounded by 700 dead Roman soldiers, and your cavalry commander, Hannibal, rides up to you with the most famous piece of military advice in history. The smell of victory mixed with blood fills the air as Hannibal tells you, you know how to win battles, but you don't know how to use victory. The sound of his words echoes across the battlefield like a prophecy, because he's basically telling you to march on Rome immediately while the city is paralyzed with shock. But here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly tragic. Hannibal looks at his exhausted army of maybe 40 men and realizes that sometimes the most brilliant tactical mind in history can still make the wrong strategic decision. Now, forget what you think you know about military victories automatically leading to political success, because Hannibal is about to prove that sometimes winning too perfectly can actually work against you. While Rome is reeling from the shock of losing 1/5 of their entire military-age male population in just 3 campaign seasons, they're also discovering something about themselves that will define their empire for centuries. They absolutely refuse to surrender. Even when surrender is the rational choice, the Roman response to Cannae is so psychologically fascinating it almost defies belief. When Hannibal sends his envoy Cartholo to Rome with peace terms, the Romans won't even let him enter the city, and the Senate declares it a crime to even mention the word peace. It's like watching someone respond to a devastating loss by doubling down on their commitment to never give up. The taste of Roman stubbornness becomes more powerful than the taste of defeat. But here's where this story gets absolutely mind-blowing. Instead of collapsing after Cannae, Rome does something unprecedented. They recruit 10 slaves as soldiers, promising them freedom if they serve well. It's like watching someone respond to losing their professional army by creating an entirely new kind of military force based on desperation and hope. The sound of chains being removed becomes the soundtrack to Roman innovation. What makes Hannibal's strategic dilemma so universally relatable is that we've all been in situations where we achieved something amazing but couldn't figure out how to capitalize on it. Maybe it's getting a great job interview but not knowing how to negotiate the offer, or creating something brilliant but not knowing how to market it. Hannibal represents every genius who's ever discovered that talent without resources is just expensive potential. The most quotable tragedy of Hannibal's situation is that sometimes the most dangerous thing about achieving the impossible is that people expect you to keep doing impossible things. After Cannae, everyone assumes Hannibal can just march on Rome and capture it, but the reality is that siege warfare requires completely different skills and resources than battlefield tactics. The feel of expectation becomes heavier than any armor. Here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly ironic. While Hannibal is trying to figure out how to convert his tactical brilliance into strategic victory, Rome is busy learning from their defeats. They go back to the Fabian strategy of avoiding direct confrontation, focusing instead on attacking Hannibal's new allies and slowly bleeding his forces through attrition. It's like watching someone respond to being outplayed by changing the rules of the game entirely. What's really heartbreaking about Hannibal's position after Cannae is how it reveals the limitations of individual genius in the face of institutional resilience. Despite gaining allies like Capua and Tarentum, and despite Syracuse switching sides to support him, Hannibal can't break Rome's fundamental advantage. They have a system that can survive the loss of individual leaders and armies. The smell of systemic strength becomes more powerful than the scent of personal brilliance. The psychological toll of this impossible situation on Hannibal must have been crushing. He's achieved military perfection at Cannae, but he's still trapped in Italy with a dwindling army, no siege equipment, and no way to force Rome to surrender. It's like being a chess grandmaster who can win every individual game but can't figure out how to win the tournament. But here's what makes this story so universally relevant. Hannibal proves that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against your enemies, but against the limitations of your own situation. While Rome is adapting their entire strategic approach, Hannibal is stuck trying to repeat tactics that worked brilliantly once, but can't be replicated without the element of surprise. The most beautiful part of this tragic story is how it demonstrates the difference between tactical genius and strategic wisdom. Hannibal can read a battlefield like poetry, but he struggles to read the larger political and logistical poetry of warfare. The taste of this limitation becomes bitter when you realize that sometimes being the best at one thing can blind you to everything else. What's really tragic is watching Hannibal's army slowly dissolve through attrition over the following years. By 205 BC, he's contained to a small territory in Bruttium, where he remains until summoned back to Africa to confront Scipio in 202 BC. The sound of opportunity slipping away becomes the soundtrack to genius trapped by circumstances. The most quotable wisdom from Hannibal's decline is that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one who defeats you in battle, it's the one who refuses to let you win the war. Rome's genius wasn't military, it was psychological and institutional. They figured out how to absorb devastating losses and keep fighting, while Hannibal figured out how to win battles but not how to end wars. Here's the kicker that makes this story so eternally relevant. Hannibal's experience after Cannae is basically every startup founder who creates an amazing product but can't figure out how to scale it into a sustainable business. Tactical brilliance without strategic resources is just expensive entertainment. What's really heartbreaking is imagining Hannibal in his later years, after his final defeat at Zama, serving as a military advisor to various kings who want to use his genius against Rome. He spends his exile moving from court to court, first with Antiochus III, then in Armenia, finally in Bithynia, always one step ahead of Roman pursuit. The feel of being hunted becomes as familiar as the feel of victory once was. The most tragic ending to this story of genius is how it concludes. In 183 BC, cornered by Roman agents and facing capture, Hannibal chooses suicide by poison rather than surrender. It's like watching someone who rewrote the rules of warfare choose to write his own final chapter rather than let his enemies write it for him. But here's what makes Hannibal's story so universally inspiring despite its tragic ending. He proves that sometimes the most important thing you can do is attempt the impossible, even if you can't complete it. His crossing of the Alps, his victories in Italy, his tactical innovations at Cannae, they all become part of military education for the next 0 years. The smell of immortal influence becomes stronger than the scent of temporary defeat. The most beautiful lesson from Hannibal's life is that genius isn't measured by whether you win or lose, it's measured by whether you change how the game is played. Every military academy still studies his tactics, every underdog still draws inspiration from his audacity, and every person facing impossible odds still remembers that someone once crossed the Alps with elephants because he refused to accept that it couldn't be done. As we prepare to leave Hannibal's tragic brilliance behind, remember that his story isn't really about ancient warfare. It's about the eternal human struggle between individual genius and systemic power. The feel of that struggle becomes as real as the mountain air he once breathed, reminding us that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that inspire others long after the original victor has fallen. What happens next in our journey through history's greatest underdogs will make Hannibal's military genius look like preparation for something even more impossible. Because we're about to meet someone who didn't just challenge empires, she built one from nothing, and she did it in a world where women weren't supposed to have any power at all. Shih is waiting on the South China Sea, and she's going to show us what happens when someone refuses to accept any limitations whatsoever. The real wisdom of Hannibal's story isn't about military tactics or ancient politics. It's about what happens when you're so good at something that everyone expects you to be invincible. He proved that sometimes the price of genius is the burden of impossible expectations, but he also proved that attempting the impossible is always worth it, even when you can't quite achieve it. And that's a lesson that transcends any particular century or battlefield. It's about what it means to be brilliantly, tragically, inspiringly human. So we've just watched Hannibal's genius tragically outpace his resources, proving that sometimes even the most brilliant minds can't overcome systemic limitations. And now we're about to meet someone who makes every underdog story you've ever heard look like amateur hour. Because what happens next isn't just about overcoming impossible odds, it's about a woman who literally rewrote the rules of power, gender, and maritime warfare in ways that would make modern CEOs weep with envy. And honestly, if there's one person in history who proves that the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate someone because of where they came from, it's Shih, the woman who went from working in a floating brothel to commanding the largest naval force in human history. Picture this. You're scrolling through LinkedIn, reading about inspiring business leaders and their rise to success, when suddenly you realize you're looking at stories that pale in comparison to what happened in the South China Sea 200 years ago. The smell of salt, air, and opportunity fills your imagination as you try to comprehend a woman who didn't just break glass ceilings. She obliterated them with cannon fire. The sound of waves lapping against wooden hulls becomes the soundtrack to the most incredible rags to riches story in maritime history. Now, forget what you think you know about historical female empowerment being limited to queens who inherited their power, or noble women who influenced from behind the scenes. Because Shih started with literally nothing, born Shi Yang around 1775, she worked as a courtesan on a floating brothel in Canton, which was basically the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy in imperial China. It's like starting your career in the most marginalized position possible and somehow ending up as the CEO of the world's largest corporation. But here's where this story gets absolutely mind-blowing. In 1801, she marries Zheng Yi, a powerful pirate commander who had managed to unite several rival pirate gangs into a loose confederation. The taste of possibility must have been intoxicating as this young woman suddenly finds herself connected to maritime power. But here's the kicker. She's not just along for the ride. She's watching, learning, and preparing for something that will make her husband's achievements look like a gentle warm-up. The most quotable thing about Shih's early life is that sometimes the most powerful education you can get is watching how power actually works from the inside. While other women of her era are limited to domestic concerns, she's getting a front row seat to maritime politics, military strategy, and the complex economics of organized piracy. The feel of silk against her skin becomes familiar, but so does the weight of strategic thinking. What makes this transformation so universally inspiring is how it demonstrates that intelligence and ambition can overcome almost any disadvantage. When Zheng Yi dies suddenly in 1807, leaving behind a power vacuum that threatens to tear apart the entire pirate confederation, most people expect the alliance to collapse. But Shih looks at this crisis and sees the ultimate opportunity. Here's where this story becomes the ultimate masterclass in seizing power. Instead of mourning quietly and fading into obscurity like everyone expects, Shih immediately moves to consolidate control over her late husband's fleet. The sound of political maneuvering echoes across the Pearl River as she outplays seasoned pirate commanders who've been in the game for decades. It's like watching someone win a hostile takeover using nothing but intelligence, timing, and absolute fearlessness. But what makes her power grab so brilliant is how she uses the existing system against itself. She secures the loyalty of her stepson and key lieutenants, then leverages traditional Chinese concepts of family honor and succession to legitimize her claim to leadership. The smell of incense from ancestral shrines mingles with the salt air as she transforms personal tragedy into political opportunity. The psychological brilliance of Shih's approach cannot be overstated. She doesn't try to rule like a man or apologize for being a woman. She creates an entirely new category of leadership that combines feminine intelligence with masculine authority. It's like watching someone invent a new language of power that nobody knows how to counter. What's really beautiful about this moment in history is how it reveals something profound about human potential. Here's a woman who society says should have no power, no voice, no agency, and she responds by building an empire that will challenge 3 different world powers simultaneously. The taste of revolution becomes as real as the taste of sea spray. Here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly relevant to our modern world. Shih essentially becomes the ultimate startup founder, except her startup is organized piracy, and her market disruption involves controlling the busiest shipping lanes in Asia. While traditional powers are playing by established rules, she's writing entirely new ones. The most inspiring part of Ching Shi's rise is how she handles the skepticism and resistance from her own followers. Many of the pirate captains initially refuse to take orders from a woman, but she systematically wins them over through a combination of strategic brilliance, fair treatment, and the simple fact that her leadership makes them all richer and more powerful. The sound of grumbling transforms into the sound of loyalty as results speak louder than prejudice. What makes this transformation so addictive is watching someone turn every disadvantage into an advantage. Her outsider status means she's not bound by traditional pirate hierarchies. Her intelligence means she can see opportunities that others miss. And her gender means her enemies consistently underestimate her until it's too late. It's like watching someone play chess while everyone else is still learning checkers. The most quotable wisdom from Ching Shi's early rise is that sometimes the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone thinks doesn't belong there. While her rivals are busy fighting each other for scraps of traditional power, she's quietly building something unprecedented. The feel of destiny becomes as tangible as the deck planks under her feet. But here's what makes this story so universally relatable. We've all been in situations where people doubted our capabilities based on their assumptions about who we are or where we came from. Ching Shi represents every person who's ever been told they can't achieve something because of their background, gender, or circumstances. The difference is that she didn't just prove them wrong, she made them irrelevant. What's really heartbreaking about this historical moment is realizing how many other brilliant women probably never got the chance to show what they were capable of. Ching Shi succeeds partly because of her own genius, but also because circumstances create a brief window where traditional power structures are disrupted enough for her to slip through. The smell of missed opportunities hangs over history like fog over the Pearl River. The psychological impact of Ching Shi's rise on her contemporaries must have been staggering. Here's a woman who's supposed to be powerless, suddenly commanding fleets that can challenge imperial navies. It's like watching someone rewrite the fundamental laws of physics through pure force of will and strategic brilliance. But the most beautiful part of this origin story is how it proves that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to accept the limitations other people place on you. Ching Shi doesn't argue with people who say women can't be pirate admirals. She just becomes one and lets the results speak for themselves. The sound of breaking barriers becomes as real as the sound of cannon fire. What happens next in Ching Shi's incredible journey will make this power grab look like gentle preparation for the main event. Because we're about to witness her transform a loose collection of pirate gangs into the most disciplined and effective naval force in the world, and the method she uses will make every management textbook you've ever read look like amateur hour. The real question isn't whether she can hold on to power, it's whether the world is ready for what she's about to build. And trust me, what we discover about her organizational genius will make every business leader you've ever admired look like they're playing in the minor leagues. Because when you're managing 80 zero pirates across 800 ships, every decision becomes a masterclass in leadership, logistics, and the art of turning chaos into unstoppable force. So we've just watched Ching Shi seize power from the ultimate underdog position, and now we're about to witness something that will make every management textbook you've ever read look like amateur hour. Because what happens next isn't just about running a pirate fleet, it's about transforming 80 zero chaotic criminals into the most disciplined and effective naval force in the world. And honestly, if there's one thing that proves organizational genius can turn any group into an unstoppable machine, it's watching Ching Shi create a corporate structure so efficient it would make modern Fortune 500 companies weep with envy. Picture this. You're trying to manage a team of maybe 20 people at work, and half the time you can't get them to show up to meetings on time. The smell of chaos and competing egos fills the air as you struggle to coordinate basic projects with people who actually want to keep their jobs. The sound of missed deadlines and office politics creates a symphony of dysfunction that makes you question your sanity. Now, imagine trying to manage 80 zero pirates across 800 ships, where your employees are armed, violent, and traditionally solve disagreements by stabbing each other. But here's where Ching Shi's story gets absolutely mind-blowing. Instead of trying to control this chaos through fear alone, she creates something unprecedented. A comprehensive legal code that turns piracy into a legitimate business operation. While other pirate leaders are content with basic "don't steal from me" rules, Ching Shi is basically inventing corporate governance for criminals. It's like watching someone turn a street gang into IBM, except with more cannons and significantly better profit margins. Now, forget what you think you know about pirate codes being simple lists of don't do this or we'll kill you. Because Shi's code is a sophisticated legal document that covers everything from sexual conduct to financial transparency, from military discipline to prisoner treatment, the taste of revolutionary thinking becomes as real as the salt air her fleet breathes, because she's not just making rules, she's creating a civilization. The most quotable thing about Shi's organizational genius is that she didn't just command pirates, she transformed them into the world's first multinational maritime corporation. Her code stipulated that all captured loot had to be presented for inspection and then distributed according to strict protocols, with individual ships keeping 1/5 while the rest went to the general fleet fund. It's like implementing profit sharing and transparent accounting in an industry built on theft and violence. But here's where this story gets really fascinating. The enforcement of these rules was described as incredibly swift and efficient, with punishments ranging from ear removal for unauthorized shore leave to immediate execution for disobeying orders. The sound of discipline being maintained echoes across the South China Sea, as Shi proves that sometimes the most effective management tool is absolute consistency. It's like having an HR department with the authority to actually solve problems permanently. What makes this organizational revolution so universally relatable is that we've all worked in environments where unclear rules and inconsistent enforcement created chaos. Shi represents every manager who's ever realized that the key to success isn't having the smartest people, it's having people who know exactly what's expected of them and exactly what happens if they don't. Deliver. Here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly relevant to our modern world. Shi's fleet grew from 200 ships to over 800 ships, precisely because her organizational structure was so superior to her competitors. While other pirate gangs were losing members to infighting and desertion, pirates were literally lining up to join her operation. The feel of professional pride becomes as important as the weight of gold when you're part of something that actually works. But what's really beautiful about her management approach is how she handles the most sensitive issues. Her code explicitly banned the rape of female captives, with death as the punishment, and established a formal system where pirates could purchase captured women as wives for 40, but only if they promised marriage and could support a family. It's like creating HR policies for an industry that traditionally had no policies at all. The psychological impact of this level of organization on both her pirates and her enemies cannot be overstated. When you're facing a fleet where every ship knows exactly what it's supposed to do, where every sailor follows the same protocols, and where discipline is maintained through consistent enforcement, you're not fighting pirates anymore, you're fighting a navy. The smell of professional competence becomes more intimidating than the scent of gunpowder. What's absolutely mind-blowing about Shi's organizational genius is how she uses structure to create loyalty by ensuring fair distribution of loot, consistent treatment of crew members, and clear advancement opportunities. She transforms piracy from a desperate survival strategy into a legitimate career path. It's like watching someone turn a gig economy into a pension plan. The most shocking part of her fleet's organization is the sheer scale of what she's managing. At its peak, her confederation controlled over 800 ships with between 70, 0 to 80, 0 people under her command. The sound of this massive operation functioning smoothly becomes a testament to organizational brilliance that would make modern logistics companies jealous. It's like running Amazon, except your delivery drivers are armed and your customer service involves cannons. Here's where this story becomes the ultimate masterclass in scaling operations. Shi doesn't just manage her fleet directly, she creates a hierarchical command structure with clear chains of authority and standardized procedures that allow her to control thousands of ships without micromanaging. The taste of systematic thinking becomes as satisfying as the taste of victory. But the real genius of her approach becomes clear when you understand how she handles competition. Instead of fighting rival pirate gangs, she absorbs them by offering better working conditions, fairer profit sharing, and more professional management. It's like winning a business war through superior employee benefits rather than hostile takeovers. The most quotable wisdom from Shi's organizational revolution is that sometimes the most powerful weapon you can have is a system that works better than everyone else's chaos. While her competitors are struggling with basic coordination, she's running a maritime empire with the efficiency of a Swiss watch and the profitability of a tech startup. What's really heartbreaking about this level of organizational excellence is realizing how rare it was in her era. Here's a woman creating management systems that won't be formally studied in business schools for another 150 years, and she's doing it while commanding pirates in the South China Sea. The feel of being ahead of your time becomes both exhilarating and isolating. The psychological transformation of her pirates under the system is absolutely fascinating. Men and women who joined as desperate criminals gradually become professional naval officers, with pride in their organization and loyalty to their commander. It's like watching a rehabilitation program that actually works, except instead of reducing crime, it's making crime incredibly efficient. But here's the kicker that makes this story so eternally relevant. Shih proves that leadership isn't about being the toughest person in the room, it's about creating systems that make everyone else more effective. Every successful organization, from tech companies to sports teams, follows the same basic principles she's implementing on the high seas. The most beautiful part of her organizational genius is how it reveals something profound about human nature. People don't just want to be commanded, they want to be part of something that works, something that treats them fairly, and something that gives them a chance to succeed. The sound of 80, zero people working together toward common goals becomes the ultimate symphony of human cooperation. What happens next will make this organizational masterpiece look like preparation for the ultimate test of her leadership. Because we're about to witness Shih's fleet face off against not just one empire, but 3 world powers simultaneously, and discover whether her perfectly organized pirates can defeat the combined might of China, Portugal, and Britain. The real question isn't whether her system works in theory, it's whether it can survive when the entire world decides you're too dangerous to exist. And trust me, what we discover about her military tactics will make every war movie you've ever seen look like a children's playground dispute. Because when you've turned 80, zero criminals into the most disciplined naval force in history, the only thing left to do is prove that organization beats tradition every single time. So we've just watched Shih transform 80 zero chaotic criminals into the most disciplined naval force in history, and now we're about to witness something that will make every David versus Goliath story you've ever heard look like a gentle disagreement. Because what happens next isn't just about pirates fighting governments, it's about the moment when 3 world empires simultaneously realize that they've created a monster they can't control. And honestly, if there's one thing that proves superior organization can defeat superior resources, it's watching Shih's confederation take on China, Portugal, and Britain at the same time, and somehow come out ahead. Picture this. You're sitting in a war room in Beijing, Lisbon, or London, looking at maps of the South China Sea, and the reports coming in sound like something from a fever dream. The smell of expensive ink and imperial panic fills the air as admirals try to explain how a woman who used to work in a floating brothel is now controlling the busiest shipping lanes in Asia. The sound of urgent discussions echoes through palace halls as 3 different empires realize they're facing something unprecedented. A pirate confederation that's more organized than most national navies. Now, forget what you think you know about pirates being disorganized criminals who occasionally raid merchant ships. Because by 1808, Shih's confederation is essentially running a parallel government that controls maritime trade from the Pearl River to the Taiwan Strait. It's like watching someone build Amazon while the existing retailers are still figuring out how to use cash registers. But here's where this story gets absolutely wild. Instead of just raiding ships randomly, Shih's fleet operates a sophisticated taxation system where merchants can purchase safe passage documents that guarantee protection throughout her territory. The taste of legitimate governance becomes as real as the salt air her ships breathe, because she's not just stealing from trade, she's regulating it. It's like turning piracy into a government service with better customer satisfaction than the actual government. The most quotable thing about Shih's approach to maritime warfare is that she didn't just fight empires, she outgoverned them. While the Ching dynasty is struggling with corruption and bureaucratic inefficiency, Shih's confederation provides reliable protection, fair pricing, and consistent enforcement. The feel of competent administration becomes more valuable than any treasure. What makes this conflict so universally fascinating is how it reveals the gap between theoretical power and practical effectiveness. The Chinese Imperial Navy, on paper, should easily crush any pirate confederation, but in reality, they're dealing with budget constraints, political infighting, and commanders who've never faced an enemy this organized. It's like watching a startup disrupt an entire industry while the established players are still arguing about quarterly reports. Here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly relevant to our modern world. Shih essentially proves that innovation beats tradition when tradition stops adapting. While imperial navies are still using centuries-old tactics and hierarchies, she's implementing real-time communication systems, coordinated fleet movements, and adaptive strategies that make her forces incredibly difficult to counter. But what's really mind-blowing about these naval battles is how Shih uses her superior organization to multiply her effective strength. When Imperial forces engage her fleet, they're not just fighting individual ships, they're fighting a coordinated system where every vessel knows exactly what it's supposed to do and when. The sound of synchronized cannon fire becomes the audio signature of disciplined warfare, defeating chaotic tradition. The psychological impact of Shih's victories on her enemies cannot be overstated. Imperial commanders, who've spent their careers fighting conventional enemies, suddenly find themselves outmaneuvered by tactics they don't understand and can't predict. It's like watching chess grandmasters get defeated by someone playing a completely different game on the same board. What's really beautiful about these maritime conflicts is how they demonstrate the power of meritocracy over aristocracy. While imperial navies are commanded by officers chosen for their family connections and political loyalty, Shih's fleet is led by people promoted based on competence and results. The smell of earned authority becomes more powerful than the scent of inherited privilege. Here's where this story becomes the ultimate masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Shih doesn't try to match the Empire's ship for ship or gun for gun. She creates conditions where her advantages in speed, coordination, and local knowledge make their numerical superiority irrelevant. It's like watching someone win a war by changing the rules of engagement entirely. The most shocking part of these conflicts is how they reveal the limitations of imperial power. Despite having the resources of entire empires behind them, Chinese, Portuguese, and British forces repeatedly fail to achieve decisive victories against Shih's confederation. The taste of imperial frustration becomes bitter as admirals realize that all their advantages mean nothing if they can't bring them to bear effectively. But what makes this maritime warfare so addictive is watching Shih turn every imperial strength into a weakness. Their larger ships are slower and less maneuverable in shallow coastal waters. Their complex command structures create delays in decision-making, and their unfamiliarity with local conditions makes them vulnerable to ambushes. It's like watching someone use judo principles in naval combat. The most quotable wisdom from these battles is that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the most weapons. It's the one who knows how to use their weapons most effectively. While the empires are focused on building bigger ships and hiring more sailors, Shih is focused on making every ship and every sailor more effective. What's really heartbreaking about these conflicts is the human cost on both sides. Imperial sailors who join their navies expecting to fight conventional enemies find themselves dying in battles they don't understand against an enemy they've been taught to despise. The sound of cannon fire becomes a reminder that even the most brilliant strategies are written in blood and suffering. Here's the kicker that makes this story so eternally relevant. Shih's victories prove that sometimes the most important battles are won not through superior force, but through superior thinking. Every successful business disruption, every military innovation, every moment when the underdog beats the favorite follows the same basic pattern we're seeing in the South China Sea. The psychological transformation of both sides during these conflicts is absolutely fascinating. Imperial forces gradually shift from confident superiority to grudging respect to desperate frustration, while Shih's pirates evolve from criminals to professional naval officers with genuine pride in their service. It's like watching two different civilizations discover what they're really capable of. But the most beautiful part of these maritime battles is how they demonstrate that competence transcends social status. Shih's fleet includes former fishermen, escaped slaves, and dispossessed farmers who prove they can outfight and outthink the products of imperial naval academies. The feel of earned respect becomes more valuable than any inherited authority. What's really inspiring about these conflicts is how they prove that innovation can emerge from the most unexpected places. While the empires are perfecting traditional naval warfare, Shih is inventing entirely new approaches to maritime strategy that won't be formally studied in military academies for another century. The smell of revolutionary thinking becomes as real as the gunpowder smoke that fills the air. The most tragic part of these battles is realizing how many brilliant innovations probably died with the people who created them. Shih's tactical innovations, her organizational methods, her leadership techniques, most of them were never formally recorded because the people implementing them were considered criminals by the societies that should have been learning from them. But here's what makes this story so universally powerful. These maritime conflicts prove that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to accept that you're supposed to lose. Every time Shih's fleet engages imperial forces, they're not just fighting for treasure or territory, they're fighting for the right to exist on their own terms. The most quotable lesson from these epic sea battles is that victory doesn't always go to the strongest, it goes to the smartest, the most adaptable, and the most determined. While the empires are playing by rules written centuries ago, Shih is writing new rules in real time. The taste of that freedom becomes intoxicating for anyone who's ever felt constrained by other people's expectations. What happens next will make these maritime victories look like preparation for the ultimate test of Shi's genius, because we're about to discover that sometimes the most brilliant strategy isn't knowing how to win, it's knowing when to stop winning and start negotiating. The final chapter of her incredible story is waiting, and it's going to prove that the smartest pirates don't just know how to fight empires, they know how to make empires. Pay them to stop fighting. And trust me, what we learn about her retirement plan will make every business exit strategy you've ever heard about look like amateur hour. Because when you've built the most powerful naval force in the world, the question isn't whether you can keep winning, it's whether you're smart enough to cash out at the perfect moment. So we've just watched Shi's pirates defeat 3 empires simultaneously through superior organization and tactical brilliance, and now we're about to witness something that will make every business exit strategy you've ever heard about look like amateur hour. Because what happens next isn't just about knowing when to quit while you're ahead, it's about the ultimate masterclass in how to negotiate from a position of strength and retire as the most successful pirate in human history. And honestly, if there's one thing that proves the smartest warriors know that the best victory is the one where everyone walks away alive and rich, it's watching Shi turn surrender into the most profitable business deal of the 19th century. Picture this. You're sitting in a boardroom in 2025, listening to a startup founder explain their exit strategy, when suddenly you realize you're hearing a pale imitation of something that happened 200 years ago in the South China Sea. The smell of expensive leather and nervous sweat fills the air as modern executives try to negotiate deals worth millions, while Shi once negotiated a retirement package that would make tech billionaires weep with envy. The sound of PowerPoint presentations becomes laughably inadequate compared to the symphony of strategic genius we're about to witness. Now, forget what you think you know about pirate stories ending with dramatic battles, treasure hunts, or walking the plank, because Shi is about to prove that sometimes the most badass thing you can do is recognize when you've won everything you possibly can and cash out at the perfect moment. While every other pirate leader in history either died in battle or ended up hanging from a gibbet, she's planning the most sophisticated retirement in maritime history. But here's where this story gets absolutely mind-blowing. By 1810, Shi realizes that her confederation has grown so powerful that it's actually threatening the stability of the entire region. The taste of ultimate success becomes bittersweet when you understand that being too successful can make you everyone's target. It's like building a company so dominant that governments start writing regulations specifically to shut you down. The most quotable thing about Shi's strategic thinking is that she understood that the goal was never to be a pirate forever, it was to be a pirate long enough to never have to be anything she didn't want to be. Again, while other leaders get drunk on power and can't imagine giving it up, she's calculating exactly when continued success becomes diminishing returns. The feel of strategic wisdom becomes more valuable than any treasure. What makes this retirement negotiation so universally fascinating is how it reveals Shi's understanding of leverage. She doesn't wait until she's weak to negotiate. She negotiates from her position of maximum strength when the government needs her cooperation more than she needs their approval. It's like selling your stock at the peak instead of holding on until it crashes. Here's the kicker that makes this story so perfectly relevant to our modern world. Shi essentially invents the concept of too big to fail 2 centuries before it becomes a banking term. Her confederation controls so much maritime trade that destroying it would damage the regional economy more than tolerating it. The sound of economic reality becomes louder than the sound of moral outrage. But what's really beautiful about her negotiation strategy is how she turns every apparent weakness into a strength. When the government demands her surrender, she responds by offering to become part of the solution rather than continuing to be the problem. It's like transforming from a disruptive competitor into an essential business partner through pure strategic brilliance. The terms of Shi's retirement deal are so audacious they sound like fiction. She negotiates amnesty for nearly 0 of her followers, keeps a personal fleet of 200 junks with 0 followers, and receives an official appointment as Lady by Imperial Decree with a substantial government pension. The smell of victory becomes intoxicating when you realize she's essentially getting paid by the government she used to fight. What's absolutely mind-blowing about this negotiation is how she handles the human element. Instead of just securing her own future, Shih ensures that thousands of her followers receive pardons, official positions in the Imperial Navy, or generous severance packages. It's like a CEO who negotiates golden parachutes not just for themselves, but for every employee in the company. The most quotable wisdom from Shi's retirement strategy is that true leadership isn't just about building something great. It's about knowing how to end it in a way that takes care of everyone who helped you. Build it. While other leaders burn bridges on their way out, she's constructing a legacy that will protect her people for generations. Here's where this story becomes the ultimate masterclass in strategic thinking. Shi doesn't just negotiate a retirement, she negotiates a transformation. Her former pirates become Imperial naval officers. Her organizational systems become part of the official navy. And her strategic innovations become institutionalized. The taste of institutional immortality becomes sweeter than any personal victory. But what makes this retirement so perfectly ironic is how it reveals the government's desperation. They're essentially admitting that Shi's confederation was so well organized and effective that they want to absorb it rather than destroy it. It's like a competitor offering to buy you out because they can't figure out how to beat you. The psychological impact of Shi's successful retirement on her contemporaries cannot be overstated. Here's a woman who started with nothing, built an empire that challenged world powers, and then cashed out on her own terms while keeping everyone she cared about safe and prosperous. The sound of jaws dropping echoes across the South China Sea as people realize they've witnessed something unprecedented. What's really heartwarming about this conclusion is how Shi spends her retirement. She returns to Canton, where she operates a gambling house and brothel, essentially going back to her roots, but now as the owner rather than an employee. It's like a tech founder who sells their company and then starts a small coffee shop because they enjoy the simple pleasures of business. The most beautiful part of Shi's story is how it ends. She dies peacefully in 1844, wealthy, respected, and surrounded by family. The feel of a life well lived becomes the ultimate treasure, more valuable than any gold or silver she ever captured. It's the kind of ending that every entrepreneur dreams of, but few achieve. But here's the kicker that makes this story so eternally relevant. Shi proves that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to let other people write your ending. While history is full of powerful people who couldn't let go and ended up destroying themselves, she writes her own conclusion with the same strategic brilliance she brought to everything else. What's really inspiring about her retirement is how it demonstrates the power of knowing your own worth. She doesn't negotiate from desperation or fear. She negotiates from the absolute confidence that what she's built has value and that she deserves to be compensated for it. The smell of self-respect becomes more powerful than any perfume. The most quotable lesson from Shi's entire life is that success isn't just about how high you climb, it's about whether you're smart enough to enjoy the view and wise enough to climb down safely. Every metric of achievement, wealth, power, respect, security, she maximizes and then preserves through strategic thinking. As we reach the end of our incredible journey through history's greatest underdogs, I want you to think about what we've discovered together. We've watched exhausted English soldiers turn mud into victory at Agincourt, seen Hannibal literally rewrite geography with elephants and audacity, and witnessed a woman transform from society's bottom rung to commanding the most powerful naval force in the world. The taste of these incredible stories becomes part of who we are, reminding us that human potential is far more limitless than we usually dare to imagine. Each of these legends proves that the most important battles are often fought not against our enemies, but against our own assumptions about what's possible. The sound of their courage echoes across centuries, whispering to us that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. But here's what makes these stories so universally powerful. They're not really about medieval battles, ancient generals, or pirate empresses. They're about the eternal human capacity to overcome impossible odds through intelligence, determination, and the simple refusal to accept that we're supposed to lose. The feel of that possibility becomes as real as the sheets against your skin. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember that you carry in your DNA the same courage that helped Henry's archers stand firm in the mud, the same audacity that drove Hannibal across the Alps, and the same strategic brilliance that built Shi's maritime empire. You are the descendant of people who refused to accept limitations, who turned disadvantages into advantages, and who proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in any situation is the one everyone underestimates. The smell of possibility fills the air around you as you realize that every challenge you face, every obstacle that seems insurmountable, every moment when the odds are stacked against you is actually an opportunity to join this incredible legacy of human achievement. You don't need elephants or arrows or pirate fleets. You just need the same willingness to think differently, act boldly, and refuse to accept that impossible means impossible. And with that thought, let these stories of courage, brilliance, and impossible victories drift through your mind as you drift off to sleep. Sweet dreams, fellow history lovers, and remember, tomorrow is your chance to write the next chapter in humanity's ongoing story of turning underdogs into legends.